Today's lecture is going to focus on market structures in preparation for a detailed study in HL economics. But I wanted to go back to the very first lecture I start HL economics with and look at the origin of markets, just to show you that this builds off the stuff that you already know. This will be our last major topic for microeconomics. We started the year by looking at the nature of markets and what markets are and how markets fit with firms and industries and the circular flow model of money in the economy and resources in the economy. This is really important, not important necessarily now, but we'll see this revisit when we get to macroeconomics. And we focus then for the next couple months solely on competitive markets, what perfect competition looks like. However, there are different types of markets in the marketplace. They could be perfectly competitive, which is what we spent our time with, or monopolistically competitive, or oligopolies or monopolies. We're going to spend the next month or so with these four big classifications, but today what I want you to see is just how we would classify those markets. We can classify all the different types of marketplaces into four big categories: how many firms are in the industry, how much market power any particular firm has in that industry, the types of goods and the differentiation between the goods in those industries, and how easy it is for firms to leave and join that marketplace. So the first classification, the number of firms, is easiest for high school students to see. Just how many total businesses are selling that good in that marketplace. The more there are, the more competitive it is. The less there are, the more monopolistic that you see the marketplace becomes. That one's pretty easy. The second characteristic is market power. How much control one firm has over the industry or the marketplace. The more control one firm has, or a few firms have, the more monopolistic that marketplace gets. So think about Apple and Samsung and some of the big smartphone competitors. They have a lot of control over what the marketplace looks like. When one introduces a new feature, then you see all the smartphone companies come out with that feature because one firm has a big control over the marketplace. The less control a firm has, the more competitive it becomes. And you'll see this tie in with the next characteristic, which is differentiation between goods. If goods are highly identifiable because of all their differences, if I put an Apple phone and a Samsung phone on the table, you would know the difference even though they look similar, but there's enough between them that you would know just by looking at them that they're not the same. The more differentiation between the goods there are, the less competitive the marketplace. But if you go to the opposite end, the less differentiation there are, the more competitive it is. If there is very little differentiation between goods, it would mean that a firm does not have much market power. So let me give you an example. If you go to the grocery store and you're buying any agricultural good, but in this example I will use ground beef. If you're buying beef at the marketplace, one brand or one firm probably doesn't have much sway over the price of beef in the marketplace or your willingness or ability to buy that beef because you're looking for the best price and maybe a quality product. But it's significantly different if I put a pound of ground beef on a plate in front of you compared to another firm's pound of ground beef. It's going to look essentially the same, or at least for most of us it will. So in that case, and any agricultural good, you could say the same thing with apples or watermelons. Those firms have very little market power. There's very little differentiation between the goods. Those marketplaces are more competitive. The last classification of markets is how easy they are to join or leave the marketplace. If it's very easy for a firm to start or join, or very easy for a firm to leave the marketplace, those markets are highly competitive. If it's very difficult to enter the marketplace, or there are legal barriers to that, it would be a very monopolistic or less competitive marketplace. And the quickest example here, again, I'll go back to, is the smartphone market. Yes, you in theory could start your own smartphone company. There are no legal barriers to that unless you're breaking patent or copyright issues, but it's very hard to get enough power or enough sway in the marketplace to really sell an appreciable number of phones. Once you know these four basic characteristics, we can then specifically classify what the four marketplaces look like. I want to do this very quickly and just as an introduction, and we'll back it up with reading so you have something to wrap your knowledge around later. Again, we spent all of our time with perfect competition thus far in microeconomics. In perfect competition, there are many firms. No single firm has any strong influence. Firms can enter and leave the marketplace. The products are nearly indistinguishable. Here I use an example like coffee. Again, if I gave you coffee beans on plates on a table, you wouldn't know the difference between, you might be able to smell, or if you brew the coffee, you might be able to taste some difference. But just by looks, and for many of us by taste, there isn't going to be much difference at all. In perfect competition, there is no difference. Coffee is a great example because it's bought and sold so much in such large quantities around the world, but there are very, very few examples of perfect competition. To go to the other extreme, monopolies are when there's only one firm in the industry, and that firm sells to everybody. There isn't really a substitute good you can buy to replace that. And because of all this, that one firm has loads of market power and can keep other firms out of that industry. There aren't, again, in the United States, there aren't a lot of really good examples because monopolies are technically illegal. The United States government tries to shut them down. But Microsoft would be a good example from the 1990s, or local power and water companies because of something called natural monopolies, which we'll get to when we study monopolies specifically. But this is just to show you what the basic market structures look like. Moving again now down the hierarchy of what's powerful or controlling, the next level from a monopoly down is called oligopoly, where there's very few firms, and those few firms have very strong market power. They have the ability to sell to most everybody in the marketplace. Most of the products are largely interchangeable. Most of the products you can tell a very strong difference between, because Company A and Company B have very different products, but they control a good bit of the marketplace. Getting into these marketplaces are very challenging, not because you can't start a business, but because you can't compete with these already big or existing businesses. This is probably best where you would see Apple and Samsung as cell phone companies exist. If you think about breakfast cereals at the supermarket, again, you have Cheerios and knockoff Cheerios, but those lesser named generic brands have a hard time establishing themselves, even though they might be virtually the same. The last, and I would argue maybe the most common market structure, is monopolistic competition. This is the one that if we look around specifically, you'd see a lot of, but we'll talk about once we get into the exact market structures why we spend our time with others. There are a lot of firms in this industry, and there's a lot of opportunity for competition. There's a small opportunity to make profit. There's very little barriers to entry or exit into this marketplace, but you still have some controlling differences. In a lot of cases, those differences are simply just advertising about what your product looks like. Coke and Pepsi are an okay example, although you could argue they might be oligopolies. If we were to look at the concentration ratio, I think Coke and Pepsi bear out that they are monopolistic competition. My last bullet point here is really important. The individual's perception often is what makes these products different, not so much that the products are really different. So this brief introduction of these four different market structures, there they are again, and classifying based on these four different categories is really important. What I'd like you to do is follow this up with a reading and also make a chart in your notes of these four characteristics for these four marketplaces, and make a chart that shows how many firms perfect competition has versus oligopolies or monopolies. All right? So if you take a look at the reading, this should be a good introduction to where we're headed for the next month in microeconomics. And we will start with perfect competition and reviewing what those market structures look like.